Welcome to the Global Church. My name is Gabriel Reynolds, and I serve as the Jerome J. Crowley and Rosaline G. Crowley Professor of Theology and the Director of the World Religions World Church Program in the Department of Theology here at Notre Dame. We are excited and humbled by the amount of interest in this program. We have over 1,700 participants registered, representing 38 countries from around the world. As many of you know, the past 3 weeks have been a journey through a focus on the Church and Islam. We learned about the Quran and the Bible and the religious life of Muslims. We explored the Church's relationship with Islam through the centuries. And last week, we were visited by my friend and special guest, Dr. Naila Tabara, the president of EDIAN, Foundation for Diversity, Solidarity, and Human Dignity. We discussed the core tenet of interreligious dialogue, that having a fruitful dialogue with members of other faiths requires an abandonment of preconceived notions, a spirit of patient listening to the other's stories, a safe environment where disagreements can be discussed, and a collaboration through which mutual problems can be resolved. Naila further shared with us that she really dislikes the term joining forces against. She believes we need to join forces for, to work together, Christians, Muslims, and all people of goodwill. This is an important distinction, and it will help us move our dialogue and understanding forward. Now, just as a reminder, if you missed any of the past conversations, please visit ThinkND, where you can find the recordings and links to the ThinkND podcast, episodes, and written recaps. We design these events to have as much interaction and engagement as possible, and we'll be giving you the opportunity to ask questions and also to participate in community circles at the end of our session for discussion after the presentation. We encourage you to ask questions during today's program. You can do so at any time, and to use the Google form that you've just seen, we are sharing with you. Please use that to submit your questions. This will allow us to facilitate the questions at the end of our presentation as effectively as possible. And I'll try to get to as many of them as possible given the time that we have together today. As many of you know, and as per our tradition, we will have 15-minute breakout sessions so that we can continue to meet each other and discuss today's topic in small groups. We will hold these community circles or breakouts at the end of the formal portion of our program. I will facilitate one of these groups. Should you not wish to join these sessions, although I think they're great and I encourage you to do so, you may choose to leave the meeting at that time after the formal portion of our presentation. And after the community circles, we will not be reconvening and our program will simply conclude. I'm really happy to thank our co-sponsors for this project, the World Religions World Church Program in the Department of Theology, the Tantur Ecumenical Institute, the McGrath Institute for Church Life, the Jerusalem Global Gateway or University of Notre Dame at Tantur, and the Notre Dame Alumni Association. Today, it's really a special treat because we'll be joined by two of our co-sponsors who are coming to us from the Holy Land. First, Father John Paul, who is the Rector of the Ecumenical Institute, that is the Tantur Ecumenical Institute in the Holy Land. And then Daniel Schwake, Executive Director of the University of Notre Dame at Tantur. A warm welcome to both of you, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you very much for these warm words. Thanks, everybody. Thanks also to ThinkND, Mary, for inviting us. We're thrilled and excited to be part of this program. Father JP and I will be talking today about Christians in the Holy Land, churches in the Holy Land. What does that mean? We'll talk a little bit about the challenges that Christians here face and about the hope that comes out of these Christians. And we'll talk a little bit also about the efforts of the university here in the Holy Land. We thought of doing this as a discussion. So Father John Paul will be asking me questions at the beginning, and then we will flip it to me asking him questions to basically mimic the whole idea of you also asking us questions afterwards. And we look forward to that as well.
So thank you, Gabriel, and Thank you, the others at the University of Notre Dame, for allowing Daniel and myself to be part of this conversation and this forum. It's a very important subject for us. And so we're really happy to be able to share our experiences here at Tantur with all of you. Daniel and I work very closely together here at Tantur, each in slightly different capacities. And so in our conversations, one of the things that regularly comes up, that we speak a lot about Christians in the Holy Land. And so a question then for Daniel is when we talk about Christians in the Holy Land, who exactly are we talking about? So if you could just share some of that with us, Daniel, that would be great.
Okay, so I'm going to share a slide for those that just to kind of, I used to be a consultant, and consultants can't speak without slides. So we don't know how that works. This is just a summary of, you know, what are these categories that fall under the term Christians in the Holy Land. Usually in articles, in interviews, if you would hear people kind of talk about this, they would discern four categories. The Palestinian, Arab-speaking Christians, the Hebrew-speaking Christians, the long-term expatriates, and the migrants. I personally think that the pilgrims need to be part of that picture as well. They're usually kind of left out, but they are in many ways a significant part of the landscape, a significant part of what Christians are understood to be here in the Holy Land. A lot of institutions are basically designed to serve them, not as tourists, but as key constituents that are part of that community. So that's why I think that's kind of an important category to add. But if I'll go back to kind of what are Palestinian Arab-speaking Christians, this is obviously the group with the deepest roots in this area. They live both on the Israeli side, so in Israel proper. Most of them live in the north of Israel, but then we also have around 50,000 Christians, Arab-speaking Palestinians that live either in East Jerusalem or in the West Bank, and a very small minority that lives in Gaza. Hebrew-speaking Christians is a little more complicated and a little more heterogeneous. These are basically Christians that live as part of the Jewish community. They, some of them came as part of the kind of the migration waves of Jews from the ex-Soviet Union. Some have other backgrounds, and I will not go into that in detail, but there are around 40,000 that live in Israel. Then we have the long-term expatriates, maybe the smallest group. There are no exact statistics about this group, but it's probably around a couple of thousands. But they're probably the most influential category out of all. These are the internationals that live in the Holy Land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. They are usually the clergy, the nuns, the monks, the priests that serve in the different institutions, but also the leaders of the churches. Most of the leaders of the churches and the local institutions, the church institutions, are from that category, and that's why they're probably the most influential ones. Then we have the migrants. This is a relatively new phenomenon in this area, 10, 20 years by now. Israel especially has experienced a wave of migrants from African countries, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and some of these people are Christians, Ethiopian Orthodox in that case, but there are also a lot of labor migrants, people who come to work in Israel from mostly Asian countries like the Philippines, and they work in nursing, agriculture, and they tend to be Roman Catholic and are basically changing here the scene of what it means to be Christian in the Holy Land in, I think, a transformational way. I'll come back. I just want to go to the next slide and talk also about the statistics in terms of, okay, the residents, the people that live in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. I've made something in green here on the slide. I don't know how that happened. I'm sorry about that. But in any case, this is a very small minority, right? And this is, I think, something that we that is very important to kind of grasp and understand. 2% is insignificant in many ways, statistically speaking, which is a very big challenge for this community, right? It means no political power. It also means no street muscles, if you so want, which unfortunately is still relevant in this area of the world. And that has not always been the case. Percentage-wise, Christians here have had different percentages, not like in Lebanon, but still statistics would go back to 10% kind of in pre-1948 Palestine, which is obviously much bigger than 2%. So migration has been a very big issue for this minority. Probably around, there are people estimate between 900 to 1 million Palestinian Arab Christians in the world, and less than 20% of them are still living in Israel or the West Bank or Gaza. Most of them are outside. The biggest communities are in Honduras, Chile, Australia. In any case, I think that what really matters here is that it means that there has been a huge a brain drain that kind of happened generations ago, but obviously is still felt today.
One of the interesting things too, that, you know, when we talk about Christians in Israel and in the Middle East, in the Holy Land, we use a very generic term, Christian, because there's a wide variety of Christian denominations. And so, Daniel, would you want to maybe just mention, you know, what are some of the different Christian groups that make up part of this 2% of the total population?
Yes, indeed. This is the interesting bit. So we have, as we said, a very small minority. But when it comes to the distribution within that minority, when it comes to denominations, there's also a lot of variety. It's a very heterogeneous group when it comes to the different denominations. The largest denomination is that of Melkites, Greek Catholic. And now, if you come as a pilgrim to the Holy Land, you will probably not see many Melkites because you won't see them at the holy sites. Not in the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and not around the Sea of Galilee, and not in Bethlehem. They live in the Palestinian cities up in the north of Israel, or the mixed ones, Haifa, Nazareth, and the different villages. But they're the largest community when it comes to numbers. The second largest are the Greek Orthodox, and they are also quite visible in the country due to the different holy sites and churches that they operate. And then we have the Roman Catholics, the Latins, as people refer to them here, who operate and are quite visible in the Holy Land, also through the custody that operates a lot of the different holy sites that the pilgrims here kind of would visit and come across. Aside from these, there are 7 additional official denominations, the Syriacs, the Maronites, the Chaldeans, and so on and so forth. And their sizes vary. In some cases, it's very small, going back to the expatriates that are here. And kind of live as priests and nuns without a significant community of residents. Beyond that, there's also the unofficial groups that are maybe not recognized, but still they have as churches, but have a different presence in Jerusalem and across the Holy Land. Different Messianic Jewish communities, the Mormons, and different other denominations. It's important just to state the exact statistics doesn't exist if we consider the migrants. There's unfortunately no exact statistics for that, but this pie that we see here on the left-hand side would change if one would kind of consider that a lot of the Asian labor workers in Israel are Roman Catholic, and a lot of the asylum seekers that come from Ethiopia and Eritrea are Ethiopian Orthodox.
You also made reference to coming back later to look at this other group of people. I think you identified them as the pilgrims.
Yeah. Pilgrims, sorry.
And so that group of pilgrims then in terms of ministering to the Christian pilgrims, that would be that large number of people that would come to the Holy Land for tourism, for participating in programs.
Yes, this is obviously also a heterogeneous group. This is a group of people that come from all over the world. Again, we don't have exact statistics to that. The Ministry of Tourism in Israel estimates the number of tourists per year in Israel to be between 4 to 5 million, or 4 to 4.5 million a year. Not in a coronavirus year, but in a normal year. And I would say a significant proportion of that are pilgrims. I have no exact number, but I would basically estimate it to be 10, 20%, which is huge. If you kind of consider the sizes of the other Christian communities, but also the size of this country in general. But given it is a very worldwide phenomenon, it's very hard to say where they come from. They come from everywhere. And by that, it's a very mixed group as well.
Sure. One of the things that that strikes me in terms of just the different populations of Christian peoples here, but then also you mentioned early on that this group being 2% really was somewhat a powerless group. Could you talk or share something about what are some of the challenges that Christians face in Israel and the Palestine? Maybe what are some other key challenges facing Christians, not only in general, but because of COVID in particular?
Yeah. Obviously, churches here suffer from the same challenges that the church suffers everywhere, right? Neoliberalism, secularism, all these topics that I think are challenges everywhere else are challenges here too. I think what is really specific here is the topic that we already discussed, which is the fact that it's a very small minority, and in a place that is very identity driven, being a small minority is a big issue, or bigger than in other places. But obviously, as all the others, Christians here suffer from the overall conflict between Israel and Palestine. And I think when it comes to the Christians, they're the group that are most kind of pushed to the margins, if you so want. They're non-Jews, so from an Israeli perspective, they're treated in a specific way and excluded from that society, from the mainstream society in Israel. But there are, and while most of the Arab Palestinian Christians feel Palestinian in their nationality, it would be naive to assume that there is no tension between them and their Muslim counterparts. There is. And so in many ways, they're kind of pushed to the margins there by these two different groups, which is kind of an increasing issue as we see kind of Islamism on the rise, if you so want. And that is kind of something that people also, as I kind of bring here in statistics on the right-hand side from one of the most recent surveys that have been done about this, is really a topic that is perceived as a challenge. I think that beyond that, there is a challenge that maybe we as Christians don't like to talk about because it's an internal one that doesn't include the others, which is really the relationship between all the different categories of Christians that we've discussed. You know, we've said that it's a very small group and it is basically politically very weak, but its influence comes from the smallest category of that group, which are the international expatriates. There is an interesting dynamic between all of these different groups, especially because, you know, when it comes to leadership positions, they're all from that expatriates category, and not from the local category, if you so want. The locals end up having their significance through foreign institutions that ask them basically to take on a different culture, to take on a different language, be it German, French, Italian, or English. But at the same time, there are a lot of pamphlets, a lot of booklets written also by such leaders that I would say kind of romanticize local Christians as living stones and these kind of terms, and ask them not to leave the region and be here to kind of protect the holy sites, which I find to be not always, I find it to be sometimes an issue. So it is a challenge. We talked also about the brain drain, and that is still a challenge for this community. But at this point, you know, for me, it is really also important to kind of say, maybe it's not on the slide, that a lot of hope comes out of this group, right? And, you know, I personally lived outside of this country for 15 years and came back here because I think that Christians here have a role, and that role is a significant one. And it is a romantic role, if you so want, because from a theological, historical perspective, this country means something to us. But I think it's also because we care for the region and we want to change it for good. And I truly believe in that, if you so want some idealistic, romantic perspective there. And maybe with that question, Father JP, or that tone, I want to turn it to you and, sure. and ask you to tell us a little bit about the Tantur Ecumenical Institute and how it, from an ecumenical perspective, sees itself as part of this dynamic and where it plays a role in this overall picture.
Sure. Well, Tantur Ecumenical Institute has been here for 50 years now, and it's really rooted and grounded in something that emerged out of Vatican II. Vatican II was not just a synod of Catholic bishops that gathered together to talk about church renewal. Vatican II had a lot of non-Catholic, both Protestant and Orthodox consultants and consultors that really played an important role in the creating of the documents of Vatican II, and really setting the direction for the Catholic Church, into the 21st century. I would say one of the key things that happened shortly after Vatican II, though, was the visit of Pope Paul VI with the Greek ecumenical patriarch Athenagoras here in Jerusalem. The first time in 500 years that these two church leaders met, and really met with a certain enthusiasm and a desire to begin that process of reconciliation, but further conversation and dialogue. I know Gabriel began this session by talking about how Dr. Tabara had talked about the importance of interreligious dialogue and conversation that really took place in an atmosphere of hospitality and a safe environment for conversation and serious discussion. And I think that certainly was the mindset of Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras, because Paul, then going back to Rome, felt that it was important that a center for that type of theological conversation and dialogue be established, and where else but Jerusalem. I think he also, with his various connections with various people throughout the world, one of the people that he felt that would be real instrumental in getting a program for this ecumenical dialogue up and running was Father Ted Hesburgh. And so he approached Father Hesburgh, who immediately just said, yes, this is an important thing to have this ecumenical dialogue, this interreligious conversation. And so through his connections, especially with the O'Shaughnessy family in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis and Minnesota, St. Paul, we're able to acquire this land that Tantur sets on. And so Tantur really for the last 50 years has been involved in not only the theological study and research and conversation, but really seeking to create programs whereby people have an experience of the Holy Land, have an experience of ecumenism, but also have an experience of being immersed into the roots of Christianity and Judaism, the influence of Judaism and Christianity upon Islam, and Islam on Christianity and Judaism, but also that deeper understanding of Scripture being rooted in so much of the Holy Land. So I think it's really been through ongoing interreligious conversations that Tantur has continued to really be an important place and an important environment for that conversation and an immersion experience to take place. I would also point out that I think Tantur has been, and our website describes it by using a couple words. One of them is an oasis, and an oasis to encounter. And I love that word encounter, because to me, an encounter is where I approach, and Dr. Tabara also mentioned all of this too, in terms of how you have this interreligious dialogue, how you have this meeting of people who are different than you, the other. You enter into an encounter, and somehow you really seek to get to know the other person, their story, their experience, and you learn something about that person. But in that process of learning something about them, I'm revealing something about myself. And so in this encounter, I'm being changed. the other person is being changed. We grow together and we both become agents of further change through that encounter. And so Tantur really has been kind of this oasis for this conversation to take place. And it really is an encounter, an immersion experience into sacred places, sacred people, and sacred traditions. Certainly one of the things that in becoming rector that I was drawn into was different conversation groups established by previous rectors here. Ongoing dialogue and conversation, Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogues. And certainly what I have learned in the past few months of being rector is that Tantur is really seen as a welcoming atmosphere of learning, of dialogue, of encounter, of conversation, of really trying to seek to know the other. And so its reputation is, our reputation here is very well respected and very trusted. So that's kind of the background of how I think that Tantur has really been involved over the past 50 years in terms of that ongoing conversation and dialogue.
And how would you say that the Tantur Ecumenical Institute today is living out that mission that you're describing from a
Sure.
programmatic perspective? And maybe I think for the group, it would be interesting to hear how the Tantur Ecumenical Institute is have started to adapt to the new realities under COVID.
Segue. Tantur has a number of continuing education and sabbatical programs that have been in operation really since Tantur's been in existence. And part of the continuing ed and sabbatical programs are formal programs whereby people can come to the Holy Land to experience what I feel are really some of the key values, the key areas, the charisms of our program. It's all rooted in our programs for continuing ed and sabbatical they're not just for Catholics, they're for various lay people, pastors, non-Catholics, religious, priests, brothers, sisters. I was part of a Tantur group 7 years ago, which really got me interested and convinced that what is happening here at Tantur is something really fantastic and life-changing. Part of our group involved, there was an Anglican priest, there was an Anglican sister, there was a Catholic archbishop, there were Catholic priests, there were some lay people, non-Catholics. And so we were all immersed together in kind of this little ecumenical environment. One of the key elements within all of our programs is that coming from different experiences throughout the world, we're immersed into this little ecumenical community where we eat together, we travel together, we sit through lectures together, we have free time together, and we have evening prayers together, each one according to their own prayer tradition. So the whole environment here is one that's rooted around ecumenism, but it's also rooted in terms of really understanding what's the roots of our faith in Judaism, and it's being immersed much more into a general knowledge and understanding of Judaism, of Islam, but also of Scripture. And so when we do excursions to the various holy sites all throughout the Holy Land, we have an experience to really kind of make it a spiritual experience, to be at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre or the Church of the Nativity, to have time to pray there, to read through some scripture passages of why these places are significant, to have different people lead prayer services according to their faith tradition. And so there's a richness involved in this mutual sharing, in this encounter of each other's faith experience, that really kind of deepens everything. I think for me, certainly going to so many holy sites that I would read about in scripture, it made my faith so much more real. Just going to the Jordan River and all of us having this experience of stepping into the Jordan and kind of going through these little ceremonies of getting rebaptized, climbing to the top of Mount Sinai, going to the Mount of the Beatitudes, the Sea of Galilee. Scriptures became so much more real. Our faith was really kind of deepened. So I think it's providing these continuing ed and sabbatical programs that we really are doing a great service to people in terms of their own spiritual growth and formation. But I would also say that one of the other things that emerges out of these continuing ed and sabbatical programs is a real immersion into what life in the Holy Land is like, the complexity, having little incidences where we could see conflicts between the different Christian denominations, or to be engaged with local leaders, tour guides and lecturers that kind of enter into a dual narrative where each one is explaining in this dual narrative kind of their experience of being Jewish or Muslim in an area where there might be tensions or conflicts in terms of just everyday things, or where they may not even know or understand the other living just a few blocks away from each other. So I think just that immersion into the complexity of this land, being immersed into an environment of ecumenism, learning more about Judaism, Islam, scripture. I think the real take home with all of that is that we all who've participated in the programs, we leave with the sense of something has changed within us through this holy encounter. And I think that the other takeaway from our programs is the fact that we're also helping to create agents of change, that what we experience in our little communities here or in our excursions or our lectures, that experience we're taking back to where we came from. We're being invited to be agents of change for ecumenism and understanding, and that journey towards reunification and greater interreligious dialogue. We're taking that home as something that has become a value to our participants. Now, what COVID has also done, and the question that you also asked, Daniel, is what have been new opportunities that have emerged? I think one of the graces that has come out of COVID is the fact that if people can't come to the Holy Land, then how can Tantur bring the Holy Land to those that can't be here? And so it's opened the doors for online live stream programming, whereby we can tap our tour guides and our lecturers and allow them to do virtual tours of various holy sites, to give lectures about areas of expertise. The other thing that I think has been an outstanding contribution of Tantur to interreligious dialogue, to ecumenism, to self-reflection, self-rejuvenation, spiritual renewal, is the fact that our tour guides and our lecturers are not just tour guides. They're not just scholars that are giving lectures. They're all really very much faith-based people. And so our Jewish or Muslim tour guides really provide not just information about holy sites. You get a real feel and an understanding of the spiritual significance of these various areas. The same thing with our lecturers. They're really faith-based people who help us to really know and understand and really learn a lot more about our faith. So I think the fact that this online stuff is really helping us to use their gifts and their talents is really kind of a win-win situation. So we've been able to do an Advent program. We're doing something for Holy Week. We're doing something for the journey towards Pentecost. And these are all things that are going to happen once our dear friend COVID is no longer with us and among us, inshallah. So, kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
Thank you. Right.
So I guess I would have maybe just kind of a final question for you, Daniel. I've spoken about kind of the role that the Tantur Ecumenical Institute in the Holy Land has had, and how the University of Notre Dame has supported Tantur Ecumenical Institute in this mission. From your perspective as executive director of the University of Notre Dame at Tantur, how do you see and how do you experience Notre Dame building beyond all of this or through all of this?
I think that I'm going to keep that a little bit maybe shorter, the response in that one. Just looking at the time here, but basically beyond the Tantur Ecumenical Institute, Notre Dame International, NDI, runs, as probably most of the people on the Zoom call with us today would know, global gateways, multiple global gateways and centers in different countries, including London and Rome and Dublin. There's also a Jerusalem Global Gateway, a global gateway that facilitates the outreach of our faculty in the region, that runs a study abroad program, that runs different programs locally. Beyond the Jerusalem Global Gateway, in Jerusalem, we are basically a little bit more than that, because we are also the facilitators of this mission that Father JP has been describing. And that is why we're called the University of Notre Dame at Tantur. So it's the global gateway plus the administration for the facility and the operations and the guest services of Tantur. And I think that what I'll do now is I'm going to share a picture of Tantur with everybody, for those who haven't seen it. And I think we have 204 people here. I would like to invite you all to go also on our webpage, JerusalemND.edu, and to come to Jerusalem after COVID and to stay in this beautiful building with us. And we'd love to have you. So I think I'll finish with that. Thank you very much. And open it up.
One nice thing too about this photograph is that in the background, you see what Tantur, this hilltop overlooking Bethlehem, and more to the right, Bet Jalla.
All right.
I don't know if
Gabriel?
I've been brought back in. Here we
Gabriel,
go.
you are now brought back in.
Terrific. Wonderful. So we're going to try to get to a number of questions. So thanks for everyone. Thank you so much, Father John Paul. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks to all who have joined us. We're going to try to get through a number of questions. We have about 15 minutes to do so. And so I'll be looking for your questions that will be populated once you submit a question through the form that's in the chat box. So just open up the chat and you can click the link that's already been placed there and submit a question. Father John Paul and Daniel, I will try to ask the questions briefly, even though I generally talk too much. And if you could give brief answers as well as much as possible, that will allow us to get a bunch of them. But I warn you, we have some tough questions. So I'm going to start with one of my own before briefly, but it does relate to something that was asked by one of our participants, namely about ecumenism. And I thought maybe I'd ask you to start, Daniel, and then Father JP, you'll probably have thoughts as well. But what are have there been concrete advances in ecumenism in the Holy Land? For example, do Catholics and Orthodox cooperate better or have serious theological dialogue? So, but also with Protestants, we know there's a Protestant presence, in Jerusalem and Bethlehem and elsewhere. So however you'd like to take that, maybe we'll start with Daniel.
Okay, I'll try to answer that as a non-theologian. So as a practicing Christian more than a theologian. And it's always a tricky question because in many ways, a lot of ecumenism is understood by some theologians as being indifferent to theological questions. And that is indeed a challenge for someone who's not very savvy in the theological questions. I personally perceive it as positive. I think that yes, there are the group of Christians here is heterogeneous, but it is not something that you feel on a daily basis. People can come from a lot of different denominations, but it's not something that people will be using to kind of classify themselves with too much. Yes, there are people do refer to these different denominations as important, but I don't think that they use it in an excluding way. Yes, there are some challenges that we have here that have kind of been solved in other places. So in Jerusalem, or kind of in our area, it's one of the only places where the Orthodox celebrate Christmas according to a different calendar than Roman Catholics. While even in Athens, it doesn't happen anymore. Here, it still happens. So we kind of still have challenges that are not encountered in other places. But I think that growing up here, if I think about how people used to talk about people from other denominations 25 years ago, and now it is definitely a positive development.
Yeah, I would say too that where I think there's, in support of what Daniel was saying, I think it's in the local communities that there really is much more of a sense of ecumenism, where people will interact with each other, and people may go from a Greek Catholic church to a Roman church or to a Coptic church, much more easily than, say, like 40 years or so ago. I think where there still is a growth area in terms of ecumenism is more with the church leadership positions, because there's centuries upon centuries of things that have created mistrust and divisions, and it's probably just going to take many more centuries of ongoing dialogue to rebuild a certain trust and a sense of mutuality amongst a lot of the leadership.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'd like to bring up
there is progress. Issue. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Father JP. Sorry for that. So here's a tough issue which you might have anticipated would come up. One of our conversation partners and visitors from Morro Bay, California, noted that in the picture you can see the wall which separates now, since its construction, the West Bank and Jerusalem. And I think the same person, because unless it's someone else from the same city in California, asked about the role of American Protestant Christian Zionists in the Holy Land. So I thought I'd bring those two issues together, and I don't know, maybe you'd like to speak about both of them or just one of them, but how does that affect the work of Tantur, the situation generally of Christians in the Holy Land? So yeah, the conflict, I know it's impossible to answer briefly, but in particular, the role of American Christian Zionism.
The last evening that I was here as a participant in one of our programs, one of the subjects or one of the questions that was asked of the Tantur leadership was, what is one thing that we could do when we return to our homes to help further the mission of Tantur? And the response of two of the people that were part of the Tantur leadership, and one of them was also a presenter, had mentioned important to enter into dialogue with some of the Christian Zionists, because their support of Zionism in the Holy Land is only furthering the tensions and the mistrust that can be there, especially in terms of building settlements. So I just think that it's one area of conflict that we all need to be much more aware of. Unjust social structures and how they're supported, and the devastating impact that can have on others. And I would also say too that maybe connected with that is that there are many people, many Israelis, many Jewish Israelis, that also feel that that sense of injustice. But I think the fact that the leadership of Tantur, that number of years ago, was able to point out that there was a somewhat of a problem with the Christian Zionists that really kind of perpetuate so much of the hardship and the sufferings of people here.
I would say from my experience at Tantur that it was really profound to meditate upon the holy sites, but also to keep within one's consciousness the conflict, and especially the plight of the Palestinians. And I feel like Tantur generally is very sensitive to that, very much open also to the Jewish experience. So there's two stories that are told, not only one.
Correct.
But that was my experience personally. Daniel, we had a question specifically for you about why so many Christians have in fact left the Holy Land. You mentioned migration, somewhere around 1 million Palestinians worldwide, and the vast majority of them outside of the Holy Land. And then you also made an allusion, I thought this was an interesting point, to a sense of, I don't know, maybe ambiguity about whether anyone should encourage Christians to stay. Could you elaborate on that? This is a question basically coming from, there's no place, but it's from one of our visitors. So yeah, could you add to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the question of whether one wants to stay or to live in a specific place is an individual question. It's in the question of what that person wants to achieve and what that person wants to do in life. So I am a Christian and I live here. So I am obviously for Christians living here. What I am criticizing is a somewhat condescending attitude that is sometimes felt where the so-called locals are asked to stay and hold the fortress for everybody. And that is something that I personally struggle with, because ultimately it's fates of people. And if they have opportunities outside that would bring them and their children fortune, safety, security, I think it is very problematic to call upon a specific set of people, let's put it like that, to kind of stay in a place and hold the fortress while we have the mobility and the flexibility to leave whenever we want. So I think that is what I meant by that. Now, if you look at the statistics across the Middle East has been a migrating statistic of educated and of the elite, but also of other societal proportions of society. And I think these migration waves, if you see them already kind of under the Ottoman Empire. So people have been leaving the Middle East to mostly South American countries, but also to the US, to look for fortune, to look for a better future. Obviously, the conflict and the tension in the area have peaked. Some of these waves, the expulsion of Palestinians from what we now call Israel is a key factor, right? And a lot of Palestinians have lost their home through that, in the war of 48, Palestinians would call it the Nakba. And then also I think there's a peak in East Jerusalem and the West Bank around 67, where an additional wave of Christians left the country. But if you look at the last 40, 30 years, this is stabilized. So the migration has more or less, people still talk about it as a topic because the brain drain is felt and people do leave. But I think statistically speaking, there are probably exactly as many Jews that leave this country as Christians. The world is a global village, and people, go to London and to Berlin and wherever to kind of look for new opportunities and job. So I think, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'd like to get in one last question. We only have 2 minutes, so it's probably unfair of me because it's a rather broad one, but I wonder, based on a question from one of our guests here, if you could think of a place that's special to you in the Holy Land, or maybe a personal encounter with someone, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, that's been meaningful to you. I don't know if you can come up with something on the spot, but maybe we could start with you, Father JP.
That's a hard question to answer. I would say, for me, I think meeting our presenters and our tour guides, both as a participant in a program and then just meeting them since I've been back here as rector, be they Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, they're such impressive people. They have such deep hopes and faith, and they believe in Tantur, and they make me feel really good about what we're doing here. They've just given me a deeper sense of appreciation for themselves as it's very spiritual Jewish people, very spiritual Muslims, and very spiritual Christians.
Thank you. Daniel, would you have one anecdote or memory?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that I cherish about the Holy Land, about this area and the different communities. It's very hard to come up with one example, but I think the internationality or the diversion within this group is in many cases what really makes it beautiful. And if you go to a church and you have people that are Arabs, some are Hebrew speaking, some are Filipinos, some are Americans, Europeans, whatever, all kind of praying together is something that is very sane, very telling to basically what we all are, just basically all searching for that, for that thing that we want to be. And there you kind of find all these different nationalities and backgrounds all together, searching for it. And you feel less strange, less, because everybody else is basically colorful and different. So maybe that one.
Thank you so much. So now,
if you would permit me just to maybe give one more little experience. I've never lived in a place where it's such a spiritual place. 5 times a day, I hear the Muslim call to prayer. And so it's just, it's something that is very noticeable. On Saturdays, the city is empty because everything is shut down with people celebrating Shabbat. And on Saturday mornings and Saturday nights and Sunday mornings, I hear church bells ringing. And so it's just this mix of spiritualities that it just really floods one's experience of being here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Father JP. What a beautiful thought that sort of wraps things up. So thanks to you. Thanks also, Daniel, for today. And these are very complicated subjects, and you were very gracious and very clear also in navigating through them. So thanks to that. Thanks to all of the visitors who were part of today's session for the Global Church Project. We are not done yet. So we do have community circles, which we'd really invite you to join. I don't know, I think Father JP and Daniel, who are joining us from the Holy Land, where it's late at night now, may need to go, but I'll be staying in one of them. And once you're there in the community circle, I invite you to introduce yourself, share your location, and if you're comfortable, your occupation and what is your affiliation with Notre Dame, and a friend of Notre Dame is a good affiliation, that's fine. And then we do have 2 questions there, which you should see up on your screen, about what does the Holy Church mean to you personally, the Holy Land, and what do you think it means to the Church? How has the presentation changed your thinking about the place of the Church in the Holy Land? And after that, we of course invite you to stay for the full 15 minutes. As you're speaking with each other, please note that we should be attentive to common courtesy, to be respectful of each other's comments. Of course, if you choose not to join the breakout rooms, feel free to go at this time, but please be connected with Think ND's program. The Global Church program will continue throughout 2021. And as a reminder, the Global Church will take a short break, but the Think ND is offering a Lenten offering, Lenten music through the ages, connected with the Rome Book Club. And then in April, this program, the Global Church, will reconvene with Father Paul Coleman, a CSC priest and specialist on the Church in Africa, to discuss the Church in Africa beginning on April 7th. Okay, thanks for joining us today. And we're going to open up the breakout rooms now.